Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting shortly here, just letting everybody in. We did have a little over 60 registrants, so we're super excited about that, to hear Betsy and Spencer talk. Hopefully everybody is well. Probably another 2-hour delay or snow delay if you have children at home. That's another great thing about working from home. So before we start here, just a couple of pieces of business for everyone. Everybody is on mute. We encourage everybody to use the chat bar to send in your questions. John and I will be monitoring that chat bar, and at the according time, we'll ask those questions for folks. We have left time at the end for some Q&A. We know that our target time is 9 a.m., but if there is a good discussion going on, we'll leave the conversation open for a little longer. But if you do need to step off, feel free. We know that people have busy schedules and that there may be a 9 o'clock meeting. So the registrations here coming in have slowed down a little bit, so why don't we get the program started. Good morning, my name is Tim Phelps, the Executive Director here for TMACC, and welcome to our monthly breakfast presentation. Last month we got to hear from PennDOT Secretary. Today we are very fortunate to have with us Barry Seymour, the Executive Director for the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, DVRPC. Following Barry's remarks, we have two projects coming up, one from Betsy Mastaglio. Sorry, Betsy, on that. Not enough coffee this morning. And she's going to be talking about some of the expo work that they're doing that will help impact our communities. And then Spencer Gober will be with us too. And he's going to be talking about some use of cell phone data here in the recovery of the pandemic. And so at this time, welcome, Barry. The floor is all yours. And following you, Barry, then Betsy, why don't you just step right in then?
Good, thank you, Tim, and good morning, everybody. Glad that you could join us this morning. And sorry, as always, we can't be there in person to see each other, but appreciate you coming out. And thanks to Tim for your leadership with the TMA and keeping people together and keeping us all informed. Tim had asked me to talk a little bit around kind of lessons of the pandemic and, what have we learned as planners? What have we learned in terms of our transportation systems, and what have we learned about our communities and how to be resilient? So, I would say first off, a lesson for planners, which is probably always a lesson for planners, is that we need to be a little bit humble. It's kind of in our DNA to look over the horizon and predict what's coming. But the truth is the future is unknown, right? I remember back in the, I guess the late 80s, there was a video game called Sim City. It was before it became all about people and making your little families. It was really a city planning game. And you would lay out a video game, you'd lay out your streets and your residential districts and your commercial districts. And if all went well, your citizens were happy and you would do well as a mayor. But then it always had a little bit of an unknown that would happen to it. And for example, Godzilla would come out of the river and crush all the houses and just march through your city. Well, COVID was our Godzilla this year, right? COVID was the Godzilla that came out of nowhere that we've all been dealing with. When I first got married and told my father-in-law, explained what I did, he said, "Oh yeah. You make plans and God laughs." That was his line. But I sort of prefer the Mike Tyson line, which is everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And needless to say, we all got punched in the face by COVID this year. But having said that, I would still say and firmly believe that planning is essential. This year of last year now of 2020, when I first joined DVRPC now 30 years ago, the first thing I worked on was the plan for the year 2020, right? Looking out 30 years into the future for the plan for the year 2020. And so as we're sort of approaching 2020, I pulled out that plan because now we're in the process of updating the long range plan to see what did we say in that plan and what did the reality of 2020 look like. And, kind of pleased to say that we accurately forecast the rate of population and employment growth across the region. We accurately forecast transit usage and congestion levels across the region. And we set policies that have really had an impact. We set policies around urban revitalization, not just in Philadelphia, but in small towns and boroughs. We set policies and goals around open space preservation, a target of preserving 1 million acres of open space, which we're well on our way towards. And we set targets and policies and programs around reducing the rate of traffic growth, which has led to the circuit and the trails program, investment in new transit, demand management, and the work of the TMAs. So planning is essential and really can have an impact. But planning has evolved. Planning has evolved over the years, and kind of our most recent plan, which was adopted in 2017, spent a lot of time thinking about future forces, thinking about those things that we can't control, but are going to have a big impact on the region. And we put together kind of a whole list of brainstormed potential forces that could impact the region that we need to sort of consider and be prepared for. And actually, one of those was a pandemic. Obviously, it was far worse than we might have expected, but the idea of a pandemic as an external force that you can't control, that like my dog barking, but that you have to deal with, is just one of a long list of things really that you need to think about and be prepared for. So, in some ways, planning is not necessarily about predicting exactly what will happen, but setting up a mechanism to be prepared for what if something happens. And those what ifs could be a whole variety of things. And to the extent that you're prepared to pivot and deal with and be prepared to react to whatever the future comes is in many ways what planning is about. So we're in the process now of updating our long range plan, the DVRPC plan. And if you're interested, you can get involved in that. It's called Connections 2050. If you go on our website at dvrpc.org, you'll find various links to various events where we'd love for you all to participate and tell us your thoughts about the future and what you'd like to see. But the vision plan for that new long range plan talks about an equitable, resilient, and sustainable region. And and those three are sort of the three linchpins of what we all want to try to achieve, right? We want an equitable region with opportunities for all. We want a resilient region. That idea of resiliency, be it to economic shocks or environmental shocks or healthcare shocks, be able to respond and be resilient and sustainable, so that whatever we're doing is going to last. And an equitable, resilient, and sustainable region that preserves and protects the natural environment, that develops inclusive, healthy, and walkable communities, that grows and diversifies a prosperous and innovative economy, and that maintains an integrated multimodal transportation network. So from that vision statement, we're now working on more detailed policies and actions. What can we do collectively? What can DVRPC do? What can the counties do? What can the TMAs do? What can local governments do together to try to help build that future and be prepared for whatever happens? So, lessons of the pandemic. I'd say that there's a couple of things certainly that have become clear, and that we're going to learn from, and we're going to come out of this. There's going to be a time we're all back together, and but when we're back, it won't be exactly like it was before. I think that there are some things that have happened over the last year that are going to have a lasting impact for everyone. So the first lesson I would say is that we don't need to drive so much, right? Those of us who have the luxury, and it is a luxury, of working from home, have all saved your daily commute. Less time in the car, less time on the road, more time for whatever else, family or hobbies or whatever else you'd like to do. So driving went down, but basically everybody kind of stayed at work. Is there anybody on this call who's not had a home delivery this year? In my house, it's 3 times a week, it seems like. And I see when that truck, stops at my house, they're stopping at 4 other houses, down the block. The degree that we've cut down on travel, be it for shopping, be it for commuting, be it for, just activities that we'd like to do, but frankly can't, I think is going to have a lasting impact. What's been the employer that's hired the most and had the most growth the last year? Amazon, right? So that, acceleration of home delivery is definitely here to stay. The idea of working from home, even if it's not 5 days a week, even if it's, one day a week, I think is a force that's here to stay. It's going to have a lasting impact. Second, I would say, it's become clear that sidewalks and trails and safe bike access are a key part of our transportation system. We have these permanent trail counters in a number of trails around the region. And what we saw last spring and summer was that year over year use of those trails, in many cases, more than doubled. There's been a demand for use of those trails, people to getting out. Maybe it wasn't for commuting, maybe it was just for exercise and fresh air, but people have discovered those trails, and now discovering where they go and where they can get to, and maybe they can use them to get to kids to get to school, that you can use them to commute to your job. So that part of the network, I think, has just gotten so much more attention and attraction over the last year that we're going to see more and more. And DVRPC, we just completed an inventory of sidewalks across the region. We think there need to be more sidewalks in communities. So often you see areas that are close, but just a small link to get you to an office park or to get you to to shopping or to a school, where a sidewalk could be really critical. So we have a new pedestrian portal. It's at walk.dvrpc.org. From that, you can not only see the portal, you can add and update. We really want this to be crowdsourced. We want people to correct whatever is on there. Let us know about plans for new sidewalks, so that we can keep that up to date. So that what we're working towards next is a funding program to help communities build more sidewalks, because we think that is a key part of the transportation system. Third, I think we've all expanded and opened our eyes up to what is an essential worker, right? Maybe pre-pandemic, you thought about, the police and doctors and nurses, right? Those are essential workers. Now, essential workers are people who work at your Wawa, people who stock your grocery stores, people who deliver your home goods from Amazon. Those are essential workers, not just the doctors and nurses, but the people who clean the hospitals, right? The maintenance staff. Those are the people who, unlike many of us, don't have the luxury of working from home, that every morning have to get up and go out and go to work and put their masks on, and in many cases, risk their health and safety. So, essential workers, thank you. Please, say a thank you to all of those folks. But I think another lesson around that is that so many of those essential workers rely on transit. And transit is the essential means of how they've been getting to work, right? Transit has run nonstop. SEPTA has been heroic in keeping the system going and enabling people to get to work that have no other means to get to work. We know that transit is safe, it's clean. The COVID spread has not been occurring on transit, and it's, you can feel safe to get back on transit. But we need to support transit. We need to know that even though ridership is down now, that it's going to be there when it's time to come back, and look to expand it. There's still ideas around expansion of transit, be that to Westchester or Phoenixville or new bus routes, et cetera. So that brings me to a really key point. And, I'd say my number one takeaway for today is that funding for all modes of transportation is still lacking. PennDOT estimates they lost $1 billion this year due to reduced driving and loss of gas tax revenue, $1 billion. SEPTA estimates that they've lost $350 million this year due to reduced fare revenue. And while the federal stimulus and COVID relief programs are helping there, it's not filling those holes. And a key reminder, probably many of you remember this, is that even before COVID, SEPTA is scheduled to face an enormous cut in their annual funding. Going back to 2007 and Act 44, there was an agreement that the Pennsylvania Turnpike would provide $450 million a year to PennDOT, most of which then got actually passed on to SEPTA. And they gave them 15 years to then phase that out and figure out an alternative. Well, 2007, 15 years, that's next year. So we're now at the 11th hour where $450 million is scheduled to drop to 50. And the state legislature is supposed to figure out how to fill a $400 million hole. Well, of course, now this is coming at the worst possible time. Of course, the state is in deep financial straits. So we're at a really critical point now where we need to figure out how to support transportation, both highways and transit. You know, we're looking at Washington. Maybe there'll be a new relief bill. Maybe there'll be a new infrastructure bill, but that's not going to be enough. You know, the state has to do their part, and I would say locals have to do their part. And we are exploring funding options of ways that we can raise money here in the region to be used in the region. That Chester County could potentially raise money to be used in Chester County. So stay tuned for more on that. But, you know, bottom line is we're going to have to really start paying attention and work together on raising funds for transportation. And then finally, my last point is I think that the pandemic has brought a new definition for complete streets. You know, we talked about complete streets pre-COVID, and that meant, you know, that they needed to be able to have truck access and bus access and cars and, you know, maybe a bike lane, maybe if you're really lucky, a sidewalk. But, you know, nowadays, and certainly over the last year, our definition of complete streets has grown. Now we see parking spaces being used as dining rooms all over the place. We see streets closing so that the whole street becomes kind of a giant picnic, set of picnic tables for restaurants. We see designated pickup locations for takeout food rather than full-time parking. We've seen the streets and kind of the public cartways be used for new parklets or open space. And of course, bike lanes are everywhere. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'll stick around, and any questions at the end, we can do that. And I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Mastaglio. Betsy has been working on a new program that we've developed, still kind of in the early stages, called Expo, our experimental pop-ups. Betsy worked with Tim on his initiative in Westchester, and we have a few more underway. So Betsy, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Barry. Good morning, everybody. So glad to be here today to expand on what Barry talked about and share a new regional program called Experimental Pop-Ups. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Fingers crossed. Thumbs up from someone. Barry, I see you. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so Expo, or Experimental Pop-Ups, is DVRPC's new program to help communities and projects get implemented to show kind of short-term placemaking and transportation related projects. And it's actually an idea for a program that we've been thinking of pre-pandemic. And so it's very fortunate to have this timing because, as we've been talking so far this morning, the pandemic really sort of forced our hands in a lot of things that we'd already been planning for and made us think in a new way. So it was really timely to have a project like this going on right now. So we hope that it's an ongoing program, and this is sort of our inaugural year of the program where we see what role we, DVRPC, as a metropolitan planning organization, can have in helping communities where we don't own the roads, but we certainly want to provide support to communities that want to do these projects. So this initial year, we are working for projects that have a placemaking and a transportation purpose, and we're sort of slated to work on up to 3 locations. Right now, we have at least 2 that we can work on in Pennsylvania, and we've heard from a lot more communities that are interested in doing projects. And we'll also work in New Jersey too. And we're talking to a lot of communities, but we have yet to sort of see the community that is really ready to go. So this is my plug here. If you are from New Jersey, if you've worked in New Jersey, feel free to ping me afterwards and let me know if you think of a great project that sort of goes along with what we're thinking about. And right now, the way these projects have been coming to us is largely word of mouth or our past planning work that we've talked about. And we're really looking for projects that are ripe. If you're familiar with the concept of SMART goals, we're looking for projects that have been thought about. So they're a little bit defined and specific, and they're actually achievable in our time frame, and there's some measurable components to it. So our first project that we got started with, this again was pre-pandemic. You don't see masks on these pictures. And this is one Barry pointed out where we were able to work with Tim and TMACC, who pointed out they really wanted to get something on the ground in Westchester. And this was a continuation of some recommendations for a past DVRPC project that was talking about some bike facilities that could be put in Westchester. So on this one, we were able to partner with TMACC, and you'll see Randy Waltzmeyer with TPD there to be able to do some design work. We showed up at dawn and we laid tape and cones and homemade signs you can see that say parking this lane and bike lane that way. And we were able to talk to a bunch of people who were parking on the street, using the bike lanes, walking on the street, to be able to generate a new way of kind of imagining the borough, of seeing what's possible. And people were thrilled with this. So we kind of got our feet wet with this project and began to see in what ways we could be able to provide some technical assistance. So not very long afterwards, the pandemic hit, and this illustrates, you know, over the course of the pandemic, this is information that DVRPC is providing on our COVID resources page about average miles traveled per person. We know that it dropped considerably when we all went into stay-at-home orders. And because of that, we were driving less, as Barry pointed out. So suddenly streets with lots of extra travel lanes became public space that we had to put to use, and we had to put it to use quickly. So we were fortunate in Chester County to be able to see how that happened quite quickly and adaptively. So these are some examples from Westchester, the closing down of Gay Street in order to support the economic survival really of downtown and of the restaurant industry, which was hit so hard. We're able to see sort of a lifeline for support. So suddenly, where we knew that there was a pipeline of interest of people that wanted to support transportation and placemaking and community goals, suddenly there was this urgency to not only support those, but to support economic development and the healthy aspects of community, of being outdoors and reimagining public space. So it forced everybody to be able to think creatively and quickly and adapt. So we saw projects again in Phoenixville and Kennett Square of this outdoor dining, which really helped us get through the summer in particular. See a lot more creativity with the outdoor dining in the winter too. So projects that we were hearing about through our program, I'm going to talk a little bit about our Wheels on Windsor project. People were also interested in this idea of getting around in new ways. So this was a 10-day pilot in the borough of Narberth in Montgomery County, where Narberth Borough had been talking about new ways to imagine a corridor that parallels their downtown on Windsor Avenue. And they were exploring whether it should be one-way, two-way, where there are stops, and how to get extra bike facilities in their borough. So they came to us with a real interest to put something on. And this was a really great collaborative effort between Borough Council sat on our working group. We had the Borough Supervisor. We had the Narberth Cycling Club, which is an advocacy group of over 500 people interested in biking, and DVRPC. And we met weekly for about 2 weeks to put on a 10-day pilot for bike lanes. DVRPC's role was really to come up kind of quickly with almost traffic control plans, where we were working with the Public Works Department to do quick turnaround on kind of signing and striping plans, as well as adapt them once we got started. The purple on here indicates ways where, through a community feedback survey, the community responded with ways to sort of improve this initial design. So we were able to update it in real time as the project went on. I'm gonna keep your fingers here. I'm gonna play a video, which I think really demonstrates what we were trying to accomplish and the people involved in this project. Barry, Spencer, and Randy, I see you. So maybe you could give me a thumbs up to make sure you can hear and see this.
comprehensive planning process and our climate action plan. We've had a lot of, there are suggestions to expand bike infrastructure throughout these plans, but we really need to know how the community is going to react to that, how it's going to look on the ground. We're a small borough with small streets, narrow streets, and we really need to know how it's going to impact day-to-day life. So that's why I think a pop-up trial like this is really important.
One thing to talk about it on paper, but it's another thing to see it, feel it, touch it, use it. And we really are looking for these temporary deployments to give us really good data so we can develop long-term plans.
Something that we've seen this year during the pandemic is an increased desire to move around the community on a bicycle. For, you know, social distancing, recreation, health, running errands. And it's really great to see a roadway improvement that tests giving a dedicated space to people walking, people biking, and people driving. Having a pop-up like this is really valuable because you can test the design in real time and also build support.
It's been really great to get to see this design just pop up in a matter of weeks. We have plenty of people using it here down on the beautiful center.
So that shows you a little bit about what we did in Narberth and who all was involved. It was a really exciting project. It was nice actually to see streets without snow after a while. So another way that DVRPC's technical assistance we think we can really offer to communities is that measurability aspect of some of these projects. So we're proud to say we got 185 responses for the community. That's a lot of information for Borough Council to chew on. And we got 852 bikes counted during that 10-day period. And we saw a decent amount of support for Narberth to continue to do these pop-up pilot projects. So council is now chewing on these ideas and what to move forward. So I'll close with the idea of what we've learned so far. I started by saying we knew this was a need that communities wanted before the pandemic. We've been feeling it really tap into during the pandemic and this urgency to kind of help people quickly and stay adaptable. And we think that's going to continue as we move through and over the pandemic. So a few things that I want to bear in mind about these projects is the first point is really about getting a key stakeholder who's really interested and motivated to move things forward. And the example of Westchester, if you know Tim knows everybody and he's not afraid to knock on everybody's door and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's how we're going to change the street. And you really need a local energy that's going to push things forward in that way. Barry also talked about funding of some of the bigger projects, and these projects certainly are less money than other projects, but it's important to go in eyes wide open and recognize that there is a financial and a time commitment, even with these projects, to demonstrate it and make sure you're doing it kind of in the right way that's inclusive of everybody. A lot of these sound like really fun ideas, but the more focused you can make that objective, the clearer your decision points are in how soon you want to get a project going, what those project limits are, what you want to ask of people in a community survey, and what maybe you're not ready to ask. And then it's really important to expect that you're going to have to maintain and tweak things. That's easy to do when you're doing projects this way, and we did it in Narberth, and it was a great way to kind of show the community we're listening. And then the last point I'll make here is that once you put these things on the street and people have a chance to respond them, there is no way it's not going to provoke conversation. So somebody once told me don't ask a question you don't want to hear the answer to. You have to know that people are going to talk, and it's a great way to sort of work through where there's a support, where there's more conversation, and where there's opportunities to kind of continue to be flexible. And I think these are all principles that are going to help during and after the pandemic with all types of projects, and they really come to light through this Expo program. So here's a few contact information for some of us that are working on these projects. We love to hear from people, whether you're just getting going on these projects or you have a thought for us. One of the most useful things we've seen so far is that people just want somebody to talk through an idea with, and that can be incredibly useful for people that are kind of kicking around ideas. So feel free to reach out. Thanks a lot. And I think I'll just go ahead and turn it over directly to Spencer, who's going to talk about some other ways that some of the communities around the region have adapted throughout the pandemic. Go ahead, Spencer.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Betsy. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And you could give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides there. Perfect. So good morning, and just real quickly, my name is Spencer Gober. I'm a senior planner in the Office of Community and Economic Development here at DVRPC, and I want to thank you for your interest in learning about some of the work that I've been doing with regards to cell phone data and how that data can be used to help plan for a post-pandemic economic recovery in the region's downtowns. Before I dive into the analysis and the work that we're doing, I wanted to highlight that it's really one piece of a much larger body of work that dates back to 2008. And from that larger body of work, we identified location analytics as a valuable tool. And some of the analysis I want to show today is really, you're getting a first glimpse at it. And we will be rolling out a social media campaign in March that will take a deeper dive into that analysis. And then in June, we will be holding a webinar as part of our Breaking Ground conference that will focus specifically on how to use some of this data to help plan for a post-pandemic economic recovery. So just real quickly, if you're not familiar with what location analytics is, it's very simply put, it's taking cell phone data to then analyze that data and determine where people are going, where they've come from, and what some of their habits are. What DVRPC has done is we contracted with a company called the Buxton Company, who buys that data from third-party companies, aggregates it, and then puts it onto a platform that allows us to do some really quick and limitless analyses on that data. And we specifically looked at what did pre-pandemic visits to the region's downtowns look like? How did that change during the pandemic? What were some of the consumer profiles that we were seeing? And then ultimately, we want to develop some retail strategies based on this analysis. So we specifically looked at 75 of the region's downtowns in our analysis. But the great thing about the contract we have with Buxton is we're really allowed to do limitless analyses on limitless geographies across the entire United States. So while the analysis that I've been working on is specifically focused on these 75 downtowns, the really cool thing is that I can actually do additional analyses, if we are interested in looking into something. And so, I looked at downtown Westchester as a whole as part of my analysis, but I know that this past summer and fall, the Gay Street corridor was closed between August 3rd and November 22nd to support the downtown and allow people to participate in outdoor dining. And so I was curious to learn, if I did a specific analysis on the Gay Street closure during that time period, what would we see? And the screenshot you see here this is exactly what the Buxton platform looks like. It looks like Google Maps, and then the gray rectangle on the screen here is where I've drawn in the corridor for Gay Street. And what I can then do is run a whole menu of reports based on this geography. If you can see on the right-hand side here, I can do demographic report, daytime population report, even retail leakage reports. But specifically, what I wanted to show is Buxton's newest tool, which they're calling their Mobalytics Insight report. And what that does is it creates an interactive dashboard within a matter of minutes that's actually shareable to anyone. So it can be shared outside of DVRPC, outside of Buxton, and whoever you share it with can actually interact with that dashboard and manipulate the data to some degree. So I want to go ahead and attempt to show that to you. And can everyone see the platform now? I can get a thumb. Perfect. So what you're seeing here is exactly what would be shared if if you were sharing this dashboard with anyone. And you can see that it's for the time period August 3rd, 2020 through November 22nd, 2020. And the great thing is that, again, it's interactive. So if I scroll down here, you can see this is Westchester, the Gay Street corridor. Each dot on the map represents a visit, the home location of a visitor that visited the Gay Street corridor during that closing. And so not only can you look at it as dots on a map, but you can also switch it to a heat map and get a better idea of where that concentration was. And you can even manipulate the data. And then if you zoom out, you can start to see what the draw was for the Gay Street corridor during the closure period last summer and fall. And it pulled us from as far south as Miami and as far west as San Diego. If I scroll down, you can then see some additional ways to dive into the data. There's bar charts that show, where the visitors came from. You can see, not surprisingly, that more than 56% came from within Chester County. And then over here on the side, you can actually look at the DMA, the state, the zip code, and you can filter the data in different ways. If you recall, I also talked about how this data will allow us to understand consumer profiles for people who visited the downtowns. And what Buxton calls their household psychographic segmentation is basically what is the consumer profile. And as you go down this bar chart, you essentially, at the top level is folks who have the highest level of discretionary income and are households that have the highest household income. And as you go down, it tends to be lower discretionary income, lower household income. And what's interesting is the Gay Street closure pulled, of all the visits that came to the Gay Street closure, nearly 19% were from this top tier segmentation. So these are the folks that really have the most money to spend. And I looked at the Gay Street corridor for the same period of time last year to see how it mirrored, and it was actually down around 14% last year. So you can see that the Gay Street closure actually was hitting above its weight and pulling more of these top tier folks in. And then I also want to quickly highlight this segmentation here, which represents typically college students. And so you can see that during the Gay Street closure, it was around 6.5%, but then last year it was up near 9.5%. So you can kind of anticipate what the impact would be to a downtown if it was reliant on college students and colleges shifted to a more permanent online structure as opposed to in-person learning. And I just want to quickly show that you can also look at various demographic points, such as, are there children in the households of the people that visited? What's the education level, the household income? Do they rent versus own? And then lastly, you can look at volume of visits by day of week, time of day. And you can see that for the Gay Street closure, it was really popular in late August, early September, and then it kind of trailed off as the weather changed, but then sort of had this big spike on November 2nd, which you could probably anticipate that the weather was really nice that day. So if you're like me, you could probably spend all day digging into this data, but I wanted to give you a highlight of what it's capable of doing. And now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the specific work that we've been doing at DVRPC in analyzing this data. And we were really interested to understand what the economic shutdown, what impact it had on visits to the region's downtowns. And so we were looking at March 15th through June 15th as the economic shutdown period. And what we found was, on average, there was an 81% reduction in visits to the downtown compared to the year prior. Whereas in Phoenixville, it was an 87% reduction, and the same for the downtown in Westchester. And then we were curious to know, well, once things started to reopen, what did the rebound look like? And on average, the downtown saw a 62% increase in visits during the reopening period, which was June 16th through October 31st for our analysis. And Phoenixville actually saw an increase of 86%, and Westchester actually was one of the highest increases at 103%. And then this is the maps here show that Phoenixville on the left, Westchester on the right. The dots that are blue represent pre-pandemic visits. Red are visits that occurred during the economic shutdown, and yellow are visits during the reopening period. And what I found interesting was if you sort of drew a line across here, you can see that anyone that fell to the northeast of that line tended to visit Phoenixville, and anyone that fell on the southwest of that line tended to visit Westchester during the pandemic. And so then the question we asked ourselves was, okay, so we know some of these downtowns fared better than others and recovered better during the reopening period. Were there characteristics that helped them, helped reduce the pandemic's impact? And we found that, in fact, downtowns that had seen development in recent years, whether it was mixed use, residential, or retail, tended to fare better. Those that were diverse, and whether that's diversity in their built environments, their demographics, their local economies, their mix of uses, they fared better. They were less impacted. Downtowns with permanent residential populations were less impacted. And to build on Betsy's point and Barry's points earlier, downtowns that were connected to the existing circuit trails network were less impacted. And then lastly, downtowns that were more historic in nature and more walkable were less impacted. And then conversely, there were characteristics that actually exacerbated the pandemic's impact. And downtowns that didn't have those positive characteristics were actually more impacted. And those characteristics were car-oriented downtowns that were less walkable, downtowns that were overly reliant on colleges and student populations. There downtowns that had a greater share of neighborhood goods and services retailers, which are your hair salons. Those downtowns, as the share of neighborhood goods and services increased in a downtown, so did the pandemic's impact. Transit-oriented downtowns were more greatly impacted. So we talked about ridership earlier, and as ridership fell off, so did visits to the downtowns. And then lastly, as the vacancy rate in a downtown increased, so did the pandemic's impact. And when I say pandemic impact, I mean impact to number of visits to the downtown and impacts to the downtown's trade area. So in summary, what we are seeing is that diverse downtowns, whether that's economic diversity, demographic diversity, or diversity in the built environment, were typically less impacted by the economic shutdown and more resilient during the reopening period. And I want to sort of reiterate what I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And this is really sort of, you guys are getting a sneak peek at some analysis and some work that we've been doing that hasn't actually been rolled out yet. And this is really the start of a larger conversation. And we plan to launch a social media campaign in March that will run through the end of May. And each week we will be highlighting one of the 10 least impacted downtowns, and we'll do a deeper dive into those downtowns. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, Westchester is one of those top 10. And then at the end of the campaign, we will be adding and loading all of our analysis and findings onto DVRPC's COVID-19 resources page so that you have access to it there. And then lastly, DVRPC's Breaking Ground Conference will be held in May and June of this year as a series of technical assistance webinars. One of those webinars will be covering the topic of using location analytics and these findings to help support downtown recovery post-pandemic. So I will go ahead and stop sharing my slide and turn it back over to Tim.
Spencer, that was a great presentation, and I know that we did get a peek behind the curtain, so everybody here is kind of gotten some really early data to see. I do have several questions for both you, Spencer, Betsy, and then one for you, Barry. Let me bring up my question page here. So please bear with me as I try to get through some of these questions as I pull them off the chat. One of the questions was, wonder if those top tier people were patronizing the businesses due to the sense that the business needed support. Is there anything data that you've collected on that side of the equation?
Sure. So I haven't done any analysis or deep research into that question, but I actually did meet with a retail expert yesterday to kind of discuss some of my findings and some of the things that he is seeing. And he actually was talking about that being very much the case, that during the shutdown period and during reopening, people who had discretionary income were making conscious decisions to spend that money locally. They wanted to support their local businesses. And if you recall, early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of concern that it was just going to be this apocalypse for restaurant and retail and small businesses. And that didn't really come to fruition for the most part because people made that conscious decision to spend their money at their local restaurant. So while I don't have any actual numbers and figures to support that, that is what he's been seeing.
One of the other questions for you, Spencer, is will this data be shared with key stakeholders such as the elected officials?
Yes, absolutely. That's we're in the process of sort of bringing it all together and creating a comprehensive, package of information. The goal is to hand it specifically to certain key stakeholders. And then ultimately, when the social media campaign is over and everything's aggregated, it will all go live onto the website so that anyone has access to it at that point.
Great. And then the last question for you, Spencer, is the Buxton database on the area code of the cell phone number?
That I don't know the answer to that. What I anticipate is the answer is that it's based on where that person is, because a lot of what they base their analysis on is patterns, so movement patterns from the individual. But I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Betsy, I have a few questions here for you. I'll start with the two that kind of go together here. Are any of the pop-ups that you have been working on, are any of them going to be made permanent? And if not, are there any barriers you've identified to implementing these? That's one question. To build off of that, I had a separate question that came in is, what is the rough estimate to implement kind of Narberth, and will that be transitioned to a permanent project?
So none of the projects that we've worked on or are currently talking to are permanent. Although I will say that depending on the paint you use, like the Narberth bike lanes were actually still up for a long time. They might still be up, but there might be people parking on top of them. And I think that was an explicit question we asked is, are you going to wash them off and get rid of the project entirely, or kind of leave it there to see how it works? And so it was a deliberate decision to kind of leave it there and see where it works. There is one block of it where people don't park very often. So perhaps people are using one block of it, but the other block is frequently parked on. I think the idea there is to make them short-term as a way to make it palatable to people, to maybe not have it be permanent. We are talking to the city of Chester about a project who's very interested in some wayfinding things around the transportation center. That has the potential to be more permanent. And I don't think you asked that, but I think having been involved in the Westchester bike lane, it was a lot of work for one day. So I'm not sure that we would ever aim for one day again.
No.
With the caveat though, that was a state route. And because we had a special permit to do it that way, it was sort of a workaround to be able to work with the DOT to get something up for one day on a state route. So I don't think that could have been changed.
So Betsy, one of the other questions that kind of follow up on that, you touched on Chester. We are in the area of talking about equity across the landscape. Westchester and Narberth are predominantly white, wealthy communities. That's the users of the current downtown. How will DVRPC be looking to deploy the Expo project in less advantaged communities? So for us here in Chester County, what would it be the opportunities that we could look for someplace like the city of Coatesville?
So Tim, you struck the question that keeps me up at night because frankly, well-resourced communities have the luxury of thinking about projects like this. We're approached by a lot of kind of white, wealthy communities that want to do these projects. And we are actively calling the planning director, Chester, who really wants to do one of these projects, but has lost staff, is under like tremendous economic support. It takes, I think the goal is for DVRPC's Expo program to work at the will of these communities, to help execute whatever they want, because we don't live there, they're not our roads. So we just want to help them make their possibilities come true. So the vision has to be there. can't be us saying, you know what would be a great idea is if you did this. It has to come from them. So I think for the moment, it's us making that the equity piece important and being willing to expend more of our own resources to help more, provide technical assistance to make sure we're doing that balance. So we have balance of projects.
So it does, does resonate with me, talking about these issues, especially with the work that we're doing within the city of Coatesville. So I think it's an opportunity for all the TMAs to have some kind of conversation with community foundations, especially if we can look at the projects as health-based issues to support communities, that we may be able to, drive some support that comes to launch these temporary projects through local foundation work. Because, our project in Westchester, when we launched that, we had a very, very small budget that TMACC was able to cover in that demonstration project. But, it could be a $4,000 ask of a Rotary Club or something of that nature where it is that community engagement of another thing. So, as members of the community here, I ask our listeners today, to think about that. How can we activate some of this stuff within our communities through our efforts? Let me go back here. I know I have several other questions that have been popping up based upon the conversation here. I think we've covered those right now. Let's see what else I have here. So Barry, while I look at the questions here, one of the questions that did come in is, TMACC is heavily focused on congestion mitigation, our reduction. A large percent of DVRPC's TIP and long range plan, currently is quote unquote tied up and committed to rebuilding and widening major highway corridors. I mean, this is just something that we actually need because of the age of these corridors. So when we look at that, and especially when we're looking at, say, the Route 30 bypass, how do you expect DVRPC will be re-examining the investment in these major widening projects? Are we going to continue in the future with widening projects? Are we going to be looking at TDM solutions to these projects as a percentage of that project? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Well, first of all, I would disagree with the premise. Actually, the majority of our investments through the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, are not going to widenings at all. They're going to maintenance. Probably 75% of the overall TIP is really for maintenance, operations, state of good repair. Actual new capacity, or even not even new roads, just widening, as you said, is less than 5% of our long range plan. So, our goal and our policy is not to build a lot of new highways, but to really build and maintain kind of a diverse multimodal system. So that means investing in trails. It means investing in transit. It means investing in efforts of reducing travel demand however we can. We actually have a new program which we're launching this year called the Travel Options Program. And it's a way to come up with kind of creative solutions, be that through the TMA, be it through a local government or the county, or even some nonprofits and private organizations, to come up with ways to reduce travel, and lots of different ways that can be done. I think we got 50 applications and we're in the process of kind of sorting through those now. But I think that the work that the TMA does, the work that communities can do to try to come up with safe alternatives to driving, or just to reduce the demand for driving, that's what's really going to serve us well in the long term. So I don't see the future as, there may be some selective widenings, and the Route 30 project is certainly one that Chester County has been advocating for a long time. It's an expensive project, but I don't see, frankly, a lot of widening and highway projects in the future. We'd rather see more investment in transit and other modes.
So I have two questions to kind of round out here. One is for you again, Betsy. As we look at the Expo program, have you thought about, and is there consideration in these projects for these plans to be looking at handicap accessibility both to the streets and to the sidewalk?
Yeah, actually, we've been thinking about that in a number of projects. I'll point to one in Hatboro, the borough of Hatboro. We've been talking to them. They have Old York Road. It's a state road that connects many communities to their downtown. Is sort of located right on Old York Road. And they have very narrow sidewalks. In some places, it's only 2 feet wide, and they have a number of utilities in there. And they're interested in seeing, they have a shoulder, very decently wide shoulder that they want to convert for extra ped and bike space. So we're in the process of helping them think that through, if they could use that for extra space, like maybe this summer. And it's critical because they don't really have ADA ramps at every corner. So we have to be really thoughtful about where you would invite somebody to enter that space, how they could exit. And it also has bus stops along that corridor too. So how could you get from that space up to, to alight the bus? So it's definitely an aspect of every project that we have to consider, even if it's temporary.
Right, great, thank you. Barry, DVRPC and PennDOT, are we going to see a transportation alternative set aside funding for this spring? And if so, can some of that money be used for moving temporary projects to permanent?
Yeah, so for folks who don't know, the Transportation Alternatives Program is actually federal dollars that enables non-traditional, I'll call them non-traditional transportation projects, anything from a bike lane to transit station improvements to historic bridges and all kinds of things. So I don't have a definite date of when that will be launched. We're in the process of reviewing New Jersey applications right now. I hope that they'll be around for Pennsylvania this year, but that is a way to do, as you say, basically to make a permanent bike lane. Some of those go to trails, some of those go to sidewalks. The startup cost for the experimental is relatively low, but as you noted, for giving community even a couple $1,000s to put together the materials, can be a challenge. But the Transportation Alternatives Program is certainly a way to build bike lanes, trails, sidewalks, and hopefully they'll be around this year. And we'll announce that obviously as soon as we have a certain date on that.
Well, thank you very much, Barry, Betsy, and Spencer. I think the insight that you've given us is really valuable in how we need to be looking at our communities and planning with our communities, both the tools now that Spencer, you put together, and some opportunities, Betsy, that you've given us, and Barry, that vision coming out of DVRPC. I want to share, because I did get one of the questions in the chat box. Our next meeting will be on March 19th, that Friday, and we will be having a gentleman by the name of Gary Toth join us. There we go. John is bringing up the thing. Gary Toth will be joining us. He is a senior placemaker and a principal with his own firm. He's making a transition in his life. But Gary has built a career on placemaking. We know how important placemaking is in COVID, especially when it comes to planning around placemaking and transportation needs. We will be having 2 PennDOT representatives with us to talk about the permitting process and kind of some of the things that they've learned and some of the things that they will be implementing. So hopefully you can join us then Friday morning on March 19th. The registration will be going up shortly onto the website. And with that, I can draw our meeting to a conclusion. Thank you very much for joining us and staying with us. As always, stay up to date through our Monday morning memo and checking out our website, tmac.org, or following us on our Facebook or Twitter application. Again, thank you very much for the folks from DVRPC for joining us. Have a great day, folks.